Rivals of Aether, one of the most badass technical platform fighters to ever do it. Housing a unique cast of characters with their own backstories and lore, the roster has really grown from a pretty pitiful state to a truly incredible cast of fighters. That's right, you saw the title, I'm talking about the lore of Rivals of Aether. Now, the Rivals lore is infamous for having its high peaks and very questionable lows, but I decided I wanted to give a swing at it in an attempt at fully delving into this universe and uncovering the world of Aether. Obviously, this is a way more niche topic that a lot of people probably don't care about, and of course, the gameplay definitely comes first for most people's opinion of Rivals. But if you want to take my word for it, the lore is also really interesting and a lot more fascinating than you might think. Especially given that the first game's story mode was kind of mid, but there is a lot more to the story than just the story mode. From the Fire Imperium to the bustling streets of Julesvale, we'll be diving into the stories of its heroes, its villains, and the twists and turns of Aether. Spanning the contents of Rivals of Aether, Dungeons of Aether, Rivals 2, which by the way, amazing beta, I love that game so much already, Creatures of Aether, Lovers of Aether, maybe, Tales of Aether, and hell, I read about everything I could find online on the topic. With the help of some of the community's self-proclaimed lore masters, we managed to scavenge some very important details and hidden connections to better grasp this world for all of you. And I mean, we were uncovering hidden details that we didn't even know by looking at old Google slides made by Dan himself. So whether you're completely new to the series or a bit of a lore master yourself, maybe you can learn a thing or two here. So, let's get right into it and hop into the complete history of Rivals of Aether. But wait, before we can really get into the whole history, we do need to explain some basic building blocks that make up the universe. I'll try and keep it brief, but there will be a little bit of info dumping here at the start. So, what exactly is the Aether Universe? Essentially, all of the games made by Aether Studios all take place in one connected overarching world. Now, to be more specific on what the world of Aether is, it's essentially anything that takes place here, the continent of Aether. Also, I call it Aether, not Aether, so sorry. Pretty much anything that happens in the story takes place here on this continent. Now, there are a few locations that are hinted at that aren't on the continent of Aether, but much like Runeterra and League of Legends, this is pretty much the only continent that matters right now. Although I do want to warn right now, since the universe is nearly a decade old, a lot of stuff has randomly gotten retconned or never really explained again, so while the majority of this video is pretty much solely backed with evidence, there are a few places that just aren't very clear and things just kind of happen randomly. One of the best examples is Merchant Port. Sometimes it's called, and I kid you not, Watertown. Very creative, Mr. Fernacey. But also often the entirety of the town is also referred to as Merchant Port. So for this video we'll be calling it Merchant Port. Anyways, the continent of Aether is made up of a vast variety of differing biomes, with vast extremes from volcanoes to lush forests and desolate deserts. The world of Aether is pretty much any type of biome smashed together into one supercontinent Pangea style. And among these various locales is a plethora of diverse flora and fauna, or wildlife, yeah, I had to look that one up. And it's the living beings of Aether, some of which may or may not be rivals, that the story actually focuses on. So, who exactly are the inhabitants of Aether? Although never officially explained, there's definitely a wide range or scale of more creature-like beings and more civilized beings in the world of Aether. Creatures act more like Pokemon. They're sort of just creatures who, although pretty intelligent, don't seem to have their own culture or civilization. They aren't really capable of any oral or written language as far as we're aware, and act more like everyday animals, purely trying to survive the harsh world around them. On the other side of the spectrum, there are highly intelligent beings, typically with more anthropomorphic characteristics. These range from all types of species and are capable of fabricating highly advanced technology and fostering civilized culture. I mean, to give an example, in the world of Aether, there is both just normal fish, but also fishmen who specialize in fishing. So basically, if you're not a very smart fish, you're gonna get eaten. But anyways, the distinction on who is a creature and who is a sentient being is not really that clear. It's not very black and white, and some creatures are definitely in between. But of course, almost all creatures have a connection to the elements. Which brings me to our last point, the elements of Aether. What exactly are they? In the world of Aether, there are 4 fundamental building blocks that make up this world around us. Fire, water, air, and earth. Sound familiar? These are the primary elements of Aether, and each element was bestowed to the people of Aether by 4 deities of each respective element. These deities seem to have blessed almost all of the creatures with at least some kind of connection to the elements, and those blessed by the divine were capable of harnessing this power for good or for less good. However, it's not just the civilized people. Almost all creatures are also capable of tapping into their elemental connection, and almost all life on Aether seems to possess some sort of connection to the elements. The strength of this connection seems to vary from person to person, some people having more natural talent, while others having to make up for their lack of elemental prowess with their own intelligence. And it's largely unclear if there are really non-elemental beings in the world of Aether, but there are a lot of people who seem to be not quite as in touch with their elemental powers, so those who are naturally gifted seem to be more successful. Now, typically a person is only capable of controlling one of the 4 elements. However, elements aren't quite as rigid and cemented into one's biological makeup. For starters, each element actually has plenty of sub-elements, so just because you have the ability to control Earth doesn't mean you'll have the same abilities as somebody else. You could control plants, crystals, or even rocks and stones. And it goes even beyond this. If an individual is skilled enough, given the time, they can learn the technique of elementalism. Basically, elementalism allows anyone to channel their inner avatar and control all of the elements seamlessly. There's only one character in all of Aether that we know currently who possesses this ability. Also happens to be my main character, kind of the GOAT, but we'll get back to him later. Anyways, this is the world of Aether, with 4 distinct elements, Pokemon-like creatures in various civilizations, as well as plenty of iconic, unique locales. I think we're now ready to get into the actual history of Aether, starting off going all the way back to the era of legend. Long, long ago, before history, before legend even, the gods of Aether created all life as we know it. These deities blessed the people of Aether with their elemental power, creating the peaceful world of Aether. That was until a great evil arose, deep beneath the earth, known simply as the darkness of the Abyss. The Abyss was an unnatural, powerful essence of pure destruction that threatened to wipe out the entirety of life on Aether. Where it comes from and the true nature of its desires have been lost to time. But what we do know about the Abyss was that it was a potential world-ending calamity. But the people of Aether fought back. A great war was waged for generations, reshaping Aether as we know it. However, the supernatural power of the Abyss was stronger than any elemental might alone could defeat. All elements, all tribes, united together in an attempt to push back the living night. And according to legend, even the gods of Aether themselves fought and joined on the battlefield. To rid the world of this darkness, the gods created special beings of pure elemental power. These were known as the Titans. The Titans were massive creatures of near limitless elemental might that joined in the war against the Abyss. One such Titan was Amethyr, a mountain-sized crystal spider, one of the chosen from the god of Earth, Sylvanos. Amethyr's scales contained elemental power that could aid the people of Aether in their fight against the Abyss, and 4 champions from each respective element were bestowed shards from Amethyr's scales. These scales were capable of absorbing the darkness of the Abyss and transforming it into elemental might, using the darkness as a weapon against itself. And using the darkness, each of these scales granted the user a supernatural ability capable of turning the tide of the war. The drop of nourishment was given to the champion of water, Genbu. This shard contained the miraculous properties that allowed the user to heal any ailment or injury, no matter the severity. Genbu granted vitality to the warriors in their struggle against the Abyss, saving thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, in the bloodshed. The Ember of Destruction was given to the champion of fire, Hickory. The shard was capable of immense destruction, razing any that stood in its way to the ground. Although legends say that his brother was more deserving of the shard, Amethyr let Hickory prove himself on the battlefield as he disintegrated the darkness before him. The Shield of Courage was given to the champion of Earth, Hemiunu. The shield gave the power of unparalleled resistance, to persevere through any blow, no matter the strength. With the shard in hand, Hemiunu became an unbreakable wall in which all of the other champions could rely on against the horrors of the Abyss. And lastly, the Breath of Life was given to the champion of air, Randall. The Breath of Life was perhaps the most supernatural of them all, giving the user essentially immortality. Not only did they have significantly reduced aging, but even if their heartbeat stopped and their pulse disappeared, they would not die. As long as they had the shard in hand, on the battlefield, Randall could not fall. With the power of the shards in hand, and the titans and gods fighting with them, the champions vanquished the darkness, pushing the creatures of the Abyss back from whence they came. To finish this battle once and for all, deep beneath Aether, the four champions used a combination of the shards to seal away the abyss for eternity. And so, the legend of this battle and the existence of the mighty titans faded into myth. Some wonder if this battle even occurred, and if these four champions were merely fiction. But thanks to their efforts, life on Aether entered an era of peace and prosperity. But it wouldn't last. With no great evil to unite the elements together, the gods of Aether turned on one another. They fought for dominance of the continent, and soon the people of Aether's alliance shattered with it. One god in particular sought to conquer the entire continent in one vast forest. Sylvanos, the heart of the Aetherian forest, and the god of earth. Although he often takes the form of a wolf, Sylvanos is in essence a purely plant-like deity spirit, capable of transforming and shapeshifting into any form that fits his desires. And, well, his desire was to spread the great Aetherian forest as far as the eye could see. Sylvanos was known for his aggression. One fable tells of him chasing the fire god Volcrum across Aether, forcing him to burrow far underground to hide from Sylvanos, as he tunneled across Aether, creating magma tubes all the way until the Firelands far to the east. However, as Sylvanos continued his expansion across Aether and the forest grew with it, the many fire tribes in the Firelands united under one fearsome banner, which would become the Flame Imperium. They fought back against the forest's expansion, starting the Era of Fire, marked by the start of another great war which is also known as the Aetherian Forest Fire. Of course, the people of the forest fought to protect their homeland, while the Fire Imperium fought to rid the forest of their lands. During the war, the heart of the forest, Sylvanos, grew cancerous. The desire to expand consumed him, and as such, he expanded into deserts and swamps, places that forests should never grow. Other than the Firelands, almost the entirety of Aether was consumed in forest. And soon, seafaring merchants in the south began to settle on the southern coasts and plundered the lumber from the forest. They used this lumber to make vast amounts of ships, as well as a port city which would later be named Merchant Port. The forest began to shrink, as Sylvanos became weakened from the multiple forces, and the forest dwellers had to come up with a solution to protect themselves from the Fire Imperium and contain the vengeful spirit of Sylvanos. The tree dwellers made a pact with those beneath the ground. They were capable of manipulating rock and stone, and were tasked to construct a mighty wall. These people would later be known as the Wall Runners, and were tasked to protect and maintain this border between the forest and the outside world. However, to do this, they needed the help of the mightiest of mighty, the strongest wall runner in all of Aetherian history, Crag, the Earth's Bastion. Crag had complete mastery of Earth, capable of raising pillars of Earth at his command. Without him, they stood no chance at containing the forest deity. With the help of his fellow wall runners, Crag was able to construct the supermassive structure known as the Rock Wall. Again, very creative name. The Rock Wall stood tall and contained the entirety of the forest, nearly 1/6 of the Aetherian continent. Although, because the heart of the forest was contained, the lands outside the wall became dry and desolate, creating a large disparity between the two sides of the wall. On one side, a lush forest, and the other, a barren wasteland. All of these wall runners were capable of curling up and rolling across the wall, and in fact, they even measured their own lifespans by how many times they would loop the wall. And although Crag did trap Sylvanos, he did not let up. The forest floor became a dark and dangerous place for the ordinary forest dwellers, and those who were wise stuck to the treetops, avoiding coming in contact with the vengeful deity. These folk became the treetop dwellers, isolated from the outside world, living amongst the top of the trees. And it is from their records that we know about the history of this event, the whole entire Aetherian forest fire, and the creation of the Rock Wall. And these events had significant impact to all of Aether, especially to those who lived south in the Archine Mountains. At the top of the Archine Mountains was the home of the Air Alliance, a civilization of those connected to the air element. The winged citizens of the Alliance used to fly high above the trees of the great Aetherian forest, while meanwhile, the non-flying elders of the air dispensed wisdom and law from the Archean mountaintops, while society flourished in the valley below, under a peaceful neutrality. However, when the Fire Imperium fought back against the forest, all of the winged citizens who witnessed all of the violence and murder began to question the peaceful policies of the mountain-dwelling elders. This formed a political rift between those who could fly and those who couldn't within the Air Alliance. And ultimately, the winged citizens split from the Air Alliance, forming a new, aggressive, militaristic faction known as the Air Armada. Having seen the violence and warfare around them, They feared if they didn't begin their own conquest of territory, they too would be run over by the Fire Imperium. As such, they began constructing massive airships and military bases, taking control of the southwest quadrant of the continent. And soon after, a formal declaration of war was put out against the Fire Imperium. Now, despite the Alliance being destroyed, many still stayed with the pacifists in the mountaintops, and one such citizen was the young girl Absa, the Storm Architect. Absa was a young child when she saw the Air Alliance split in half. She was a math prodigy and skilled inventor, but as she got older, she became more and more aware of the vulnerability of her pacifist society. In an attempt to isolate themselves, she mastered and studied weather patterns, eventually being able to harness the power of lightning and manifesting a large permanent electrical storm surrounding the mountaintop. The elders were incredibly impressed with Absa's feat, and considered themselves now impervious to the outside world. However, Absa actually doubted that the storm would deter invaders for long, and despite the laws forbidding any practice of violence, Absa knew she needed to do something. She found and joined a hidden martial arts society deep in the caves of the Archai Mountains. There, she honed her martial arts skills with other skilled warriors and learned ways to use her storm technique for offensive capabilities. If the need ever arose, she was prepared to defend her home. So to end this chapter, let's check out our map. We now have our main 4 factions. The Flame Imperium to the east, a united empire of fire citizens who control the eastern Firelands. The city of Merchantport to the south, run primarily by a naval-based trade company known as the Water Trade Company, or WTC for short. The ever-aggressive Air Armada to the southwest, pushing their boundaries in retaliation against the Fire Imperium. And lastly in the northwest is the Forest Dwellers, living in isolation from the outside world. This about brings us up to the modern day. Now, it's a bit unclear how much time has taken place from the events of the Great Aetherian Forest Fire, but it's very clear a lot of things have changed. We are now ready to jump into the present day, the modern world of Aether. Now, things from here get a little messy. We're talking about the events of the story mode from Rivals 1, which doesn't have the best reputation. We're definitely stepping into some retcon territory, and some things aren't really going to make a lot of sense. But we did do our best to try and organize it into one coherent timeline. So let's get right back into it. First, our story brings us to the Fire Capital, the largest city in the Flame Imperium. The current leader is Emperor Renburn, who has 2 children, his adopted eldest son, Forsburn, and his younger biological son, Zetterburn. As the Emperor of the Flame Imperium, Renburn was a mighty and strong leader, and he wished for both of his sons to lead this nation into a bright future. As such, despite them still being young, he believed they should be sent off to train in the Eastern Mountains. There they could learn about their elemental power from a master of the elements, a wise sage named Hodon. However, Loxodon, head of Ministry and Trade and good friend of Renburn, insisted that Hodon was a foolish master and advised against sending them. And historically, Loxodon was the right hand of the Emperor. The Fire Imperium even had a saying, Renburn ruled, but Loxodon governed. However, despite his advice, Renburn was adamant they must send the young boys to Hodon's dojo deep in the mountains. So it was decided that Zetterburn and Forsburn would be sent off to train in the Eastern Mountains. Here they would train with other martial artists from all across Aether in the way of elementalism, where all elements come together peacefully. However, the 2 boys were sent specifically to better understand and harness their firepower, and although their primary goal was to learn combat skills for the battlefield, Hodon made sure to stress the importance of harmony between the elements, trying to seek a peaceful resolution before resorting to violence. Unfortunately, the 2 young boys didn't care much for that last part. And over the years, both Forsburn and Zetterburn would grow into quite accomplished members of the royal family. Forsburn grew up to become the chief diplomat of the Flame Imperium, and was actively working in the politics with his father. He was often relied upon to both broker treaties as well as quietly assassinate any threats to the kingdom. Zetterburn, on the other hand, grew up to become quite the accomplished military general. He had no interest in the larger politics of the world, and was focused mostly on his combat prowess. He became quite the experienced and hardened warrior, and fought in many wars for the Flame Imperium, and becoming a hero for the people of the Firelands. However, Zetterburn's unquestioning allegiance at times made him quite blind to the larger picture and the morality of his actions. Both sons were worthy heirs to the throne to be the next emperor after Renburn. However, after years of unquestioning service on the Fire Council, Forsburn began to question the motives of some of his colleagues, sensing corruption beneath the surface. But before he could uncover the treacherous nature of this plot, tragedy would strike. After returning home from a diplomatic mission, Forsburn found his adoptive father, Renburn, slain. And worst of all, the dagger protruding from his heart was none other than his own. Forsburn had been framed as the murderer of his father. Immediately, Forsburn ran into hiding, going deep beneath the capital, hiding in the aqueducts below. Meanwhile, Zetterburn returned to the capital after successfully defeating Air Armada fleets in the region that had been plundering their trade routes. But after his successful battle, he was surprised to see the whole nation was in fact mourning. And soon after, he was informed of the passing of his father. But more importantly, the Fire Council let him know that it was most likely Forsburn who had committed the patricide. And it was Loxodont who would be crowned as the new emperor in Renburn's place, as the Fire Council reassured Zetterburn that it was his father's wish. Zetterburn reluctantly accepted the council's will and pledged his loyalty to the soon-to-be emperor Loxodont. Forsburn, on the other hand, was certain that he was framed as the murderer so Loxodont could seize the throne in his place. He immediately sought his brother to explain the dire circumstances, and that night, he snuck into Zetterburn's chambers to approach his brother about the conspiracy, believing it was the Fire Council's plot to kill their father. However, it was too late. Zetterburn was convinced of Forsburn's treason. He believed he was guilty without a second thought. In a blind rage, Zetterburn attacked his brother, and after a brief scuffle, betrayed and injured, Forsburn barely managed to escape the scene, and Zetterburn was left devastated, having just lost his father and believing his brother to be a traitorous exile. Forsburn was forced to go on the run, and for days he roamed aimlessly around the outskirts of the Fire Imperium. That was until one day he awoke to find himself surrounded by murky strangers. They revealed themselves to be members of the Smoke Clan, a group of exiles from the Fire Imperium. They captured the ex-prince and brought him to their settlement, hidden in the north of the Firelands. It was here that the leader of the Smoke Clan, Clayan, introduced herself to Forsburn, who, might I add, got a super big glow up in the comics. Way to go, Clayan. Forsburn revealed himself to be the ex-prince of the Fire Imperium, and explained the story of his father's passing. Clayan was impressed by Forsburn's ability, and sympathized with his plight. She offered him an opportunity at a new life, if he was willing to devote his allegiance to the Smoke Clan. Forsburn, with not much left to his name, he accepted his new identity and renounced the Flame Imperium. Meanwhile, over in the Aetherian Forest, our story brings us to the young treetop dweller known as Maple, the Sylvan Watcher. As the self-appointed protector of the forest, she roams the treetops with her plant companion Lily. Recently, Maple has felt a disturbance deep beneath the roots, a sickness brewing beneath all of Aether. While patrolling the forest, looking for the source of this ominous feeling, she discovered strange purple, root-like tentacles that were corrupting the nearby plant life. It was just as Maple had feared. Something ominous was infecting the forest. She followed the tentacles through the forest to the outer edges, and to her surprise, they went beyond the rock wall. To save her forest from this eldritch, shadowy curse, she believed she must traverse the rock wall and head east. Before leaving, she gave Lily to her younger sister Mayreed, and also handed her a letter to explain her discoveries of the purple rot to the other forest dwellers. Mayreed begged Maple not to leave, as they both sensed the evil is far greater than any danger seen before. But Maple, not deterred in the slightest, headed out into the wasteland beyond the wall. And for months, she traversed the wastelands, growing weaker and weaker each day away from her home. And back at the Fire Capital, the day of Emperor Loxodon's coronation had come. The citizens of the Flame Imperium bestowed Loxodon with a sacred torch, the symbol of the Imperium. This torch granted the right of fire, the source of the people's connection to the element. And if it were ever to be extinguished, the citizens of the Fire Imperium would slowly lose their elemental connection entirely. And, as if on cue, suddenly a shadowy water creature leaped from the crowd and grabbed the sacred flame. From the crowd, Zetterburn recognized the culprit as the elusive water trickster, or Kane. But before he could act, the creature leaped through a puddle and disappeared with the torch in hand. The Fire Council erupted in chaos, and Loxodont demanded Zetterburn hunt down and retrieve the stolen torch. Ever loyal to the Flame Imperium, Zetterburn began his march to the city of Merchant Port, the home of Orcane. And it wasn't long until Forsburn heard word of his brother's departure from the capital. Despite his loyalty to the Smoke Clan, Forsburn decided to use this opportunity to find and confront his brother. Forsburn emerged from a smoke portal in the Fire Capital. But what he saw before him was nothing but a distorted, shadowy imposter of his younger brother. Confused and outraged, Forsburn engaged the imposter, and using his newfound powers of smoke, easily defeated the eldritch being. However, to Forsburn's surprise, on the northern horizon, he notices a blaze in the distance. While he was fighting the shadowy monster, the Smoke Clan hideout was set ablaze. Immediately, Forsburn raced back home, never finding his brother or confronting the false emperor. Meanwhile, a few months into her journey, Maple stumbled across a large fire burning down a settlement. And to her shock, she witnessed the Flame Imperium launching an assault on the Smoke Clan settlement. But before she could act, suddenly a portal of smoke emerged and Forsburn materialized on the scene. Blinded by rage, Forsburn mistakenly identified Maple as one of the assailants. And as Maple witnessed Forsburn's smoke sorcery, she presumed him to be a culprit of the mysterious shadow in the forest. After a brief scuffle, Maple demanded to know Forsburn's motive behind the shadowy sickness in the forest. Taken aback, Forsburn explained his own encounter with a similar shadow, and the two realized they were no enemies after all. Maple recognized that Forsburn could be a potential ally against the evil lurking beneath Aether, and determined to find the source, the two headed out southwest to the Godai Delta. Now, you might be wondering, what about the Smoke Clan? Isn't it on fire and aren't they being attacked? Well, it never really gets addressed, but I mean, surely they probably stopped the Fire Imperium before they left, or maybe they didn't. It's up to your interpretation. Anyways, while the two head towards the source of the evil, our story returns to the Aetherian forest. This time, the legendary wall runner, Crag, is patrolling the rock wall. Crag stumbles upon the unthinkable, a breach in the northern wall, which based on the map is oddly definitely not on the north side of the wall. A breach in the rock wall of this size would have devastating consequences on all of Aether, so swiftly, Crag begins his repairs on the damage. But out of nowhere, a rock is hurled right at Crag from inside the forest. His rock-bound mind can barely comprehend what he sees. A purple treetop dweller is launching an assault from inside the forest on the rock wall. Crag immediately engages in combat, and the commotion of their battle attracts nearby treetop dwellers to the scene. And after Crag quickly disposes of the ominous purple Maple, Mayreed approaches the legendary wall runner with a letter. The letter explains Maple's findings on the purple rot, and her reason for leaving the forest, possibly the same explanation behind the breach in the rock wall. Mayreed begs Crag to take Lily and follow Maple's path to help her against the darkness, and Crag agrees to the mission. But before he heads out, he returns to the rock wall to once again repair the damage. When suddenly, again, his peaceful wall building is interrupted. This time, two Air Armada scouts were surveying the area surrounding the rock wall. The first was Raster, the Wind's Fury. Raster was a cocky and arrogant, although extremely talented Air Armada soldier. He's known for his fierce and unpredictable fighting style across all of Aether, and was the youngest ever trainee in the history of the Air Academy. The second scout was his partner, Bradshaw, who honestly we don't know too much about. What we know is that Bradshaw is more cautious and reliable and a steady support for Raster's unpredictable nature. And while on patrol, both Raster and Bradshaw noticed this hole in the rock wall, and dove down to investigate. And Crag, having just fought the mysterious abyss creature, was on high alert. Seeing two Air Armada soldiers diving towards him, he interpreted it as an attack from the Air Armada. So Crag absolutely folds Bradshaw like an omelet, knocking him out of the fight immediately, leaving it to a 1 versus 1 between Raster and Crag. And Raster, after witnessing his best friend out of nowhere get destroyed, jumped into the fray, prepared to fight off Crag. And despite what you might think, he actually successfully fended off Crag on his own. And while Crag is recovering, Raster quickly swoops up Bradshaw and retreats to safety. Crag, on the other hand, gets back up and quickly repairs the rock wall. Then he heads out east in hopes of finding Maple and putting a stop to the chaos. Meanwhile, again, our story brings us to the city of Merchantport, the port town run by the Water Trade Company. In a meeting room, the board members of the company are furious over their recent trade routes being plundered by Air Armada ships. Don Whitefish, the chairman of the company, proposes a plan to infiltrate and take back their stolen goods. But for the plan to succeed, they would need the help of the most notorious trickster in all of Aether. Of course, I'm talking about Orcane, the Puddle Jumper. Due to his unique ability to teleport to any body of water, he's become a very useful asset to the people of the town. The chairman headed to the local fisherman Nesbit, as he knew Orcane had a fondness for the fisherman and his granddaughter Melby. Nesbit and the chairman managed to bargain a deal where Orcane will help the Water Trade Company. Melby is the only one who can communicate with Orcane, and after she explains the mission to Orcane, he agrees to help. He teleports to an unguarded sink on the Air Armada, which implies that some sinks are guarded, I guess, and Orcane begins to look for the missing goods stolen by the Armada. While sneaking around, Orcane stumbles across a peculiar scene. He spots the leader of the Air Armada, Commander Swiftwing, making a trade deal with a shadowy creature. The commander is offering all of the water trade goods, worth millions, in exchange for a singular scroll. The scroll appears to indicate the weak spots in the defense of all major nations across Aether. Now, I bet you're wondering, why does the Abyss want the money, and how did they obtain such a scroll? Well, we don't know, and sadly it never really gets explained. Maybe in Rivals 2. Anyways, while no one is looking, Orcane steals the stolen goods and begins his retreat. And on his way out, he encounters the wounded Bradshaw and Raster returning to the ship. Raster is shocked to see a water creature all the way up in their flying armada, and immediately he challenges Orcane to close-quarter combat. Meanwhile, and actually the last meanwhile, Zetterburn reaches Merchant Port, looking to retrieve the stolen torch, which he believes was taken by Orcane. In a rage, he begins to light the entire city ablaze, destroying the Puddle Jumper's home. On the docks of the city, Zetterburn encounters the shadowy Orcane, guarding the ceremonial torch. Zetterburn absolutely destroys the creature, and as it dissipates into purple smoke, he realizes his mistake, as obviously it wasn't Orcane. Full of doubt, he grabs the torch, probably, again it's not very clear, but it'd be kind of weird to just leave it on the ground, and he notices more purple, shadowy smoke on the horizon. Trying to find the source of this madness, he heads towards the smoke. As for Orcane, he's quick to make light work of Raster, and with the stolen goods in tow, he returns to Merchant Port. However, the city is ablaze. He immediately evacuates Nesbit and Melby to safety, and they inform Orcane that it was a mad general of the Flame Imperium who was responsible for the fire. Orcane sniffs out the trail of Zetterburn, and begins his own trek to get justice for his hometown. As for Raster, he's still pretty mad about what Crag did to Bradshaw, and heads out to seek revenge against Crag. And like that, everyone's stories begin to converge in the middle of Aether, in a location known as the Godai Delta. And it's here that the 6 elemental heroes met on a cliffside near the center of the Delta. And despite their rivalries, after each and every one of them explained their side of the story, they put aside their differences for the time being. When suddenly, a large stone pillar arose from the sea, and shadowy tentacles emerged from the waters. The ancient stone platform appears to be a gateway in which the abyss from beneath Aether is leaking up to the surface. And guarding this gateway was 2 mysterious abyss monsters. So of course the heroes engage the monstrosity of the abyss. Using their elemental powers combined, they vanquish the shadowy imposters conjured by the monsters. Even Forsburn and Zetterburn worked together to attack the abyss. And ultimately, they even defeated the gatekeepers themselves. After defeating the horrors from below, the United Warriors, the new Champions of Aether, recover from the battle atop the platform. The 2 Flame Imperium princes mend their burnt bridge, but their reunion would be short-lived, when suddenly the gateway platform plummeted deep beneath the earth into the darkness of the abyss. In the abyss, the champions fight an endless battle against the shadows, trapped beneath the earth for all eternity. And this is, canonically, where the story of Rivals 1 ends, with all of our heroes being trapped beneath the earth. And it seems like the Rivals 2 story will pick up from right here, as the heroes are attempting to escape the abyss and make it back to the surface. But since this video is coming out before the Rivals 2 story mode releases, your guess is as good as mine. Now, while this is the end of the Rivals 1 story, there is still a lot of lore left. And the stories of both Dungeons of Aether and Tales of Aether have major impact on the storyline of the Champions of Aether. But before we jump into the story of Dungeons of Aether, there are 3 characters in the world of Aether who don't really fit into the overarching narrative, but are definitely worth mentioning, as their stories do have impact on the overall world building. So let's jump into a really quick mini chapter to cover some of these side stories. The first of our side stories is Rano, the Poisonous Pacifist. Honestly, there isn't much we know about Rano, as his lore is some of the least developed on the roster. That being said though, he is shaping up to probably be an important character in Rivals 2, although it's unclear exactly what his goals are or his role in the story will be. What we do know is that according to Dan in an old presentation during Rano's reveal, Rano is a pacifist who trained in martial arts with martial arts masters from the Arkai Mountains, just like Absa. Afterwards, he returned to his home in the swampy estuary, a marsh east of Merchant Port. It's here that he currently resides and trains under Master Kai, a skilled martial arts master and expert of poison. And Rano is learning that same poison technique, and uses it to cleanse the swamp water and purify it. And that's about it for Rano. It definitely seems likely that Rano will eventually travel to the Ho Dojo and begin his training in elementalism, especially given his pacifist nature, but this is just merely speculation. We really don't know what Rano's going to do, but definitely be on the lookout for Rano in Rivals 2. Next is the story of Eliana, the Aerial Arsenal. Eliana was a snake, living in the burrows of the wasteland east of the Archive Mountains. Living under the territory of the Air Armada, Eliana dreamed of soaring the skies above, and when an opportunity to join the Air Armada came her way, she knew she needed to prove herself. So she headed to the nearby recruitment center, and as you'd expect, they were baffled to see a snake applying, as obviously snakes can't fly. But after proving she was knowledgeable on the written test, all she had to do was pass the practical test of flying across a large gap. And she failed, pretty hilariously. And although she failed to prove that she can fly, she wasn't defeated. Eliana was determined to prove she was born to fly. Eliana kept returning to the recruitment center with new machines. And again, she wasn't able to do it. Until she did! Eliana proved them all wrong, and that she was actually capable of flight with just a little bit of brain power and some mechanical help. However, the Armada she glorified so much that she wanted to join resented Eliana. They saw a snake trying to fly as a mockery of flight, and Commander Swiftwing grabbed Eliana and threw her back to the burrows. Finally defeated, with her dreams crushed, she was a little upset. However, she was stubborn and knew she could fly with the best of them, but to do so, she needed help. So, she traveled to the nearby steampunk city of Julesvale, located in Jules Valley near the base of the Archive Mountain Range. Julesvale was a city full of merchants, travelers, and most importantly, mechanics. And while stumbling around the city, she encountered the expert engineer, Ayala. Ayala specialized in steam-powered machines, and with Eliana's knowledge on the mechanics of flight, the two could make Eliana's dream come true. And reluctantly, Ayala actually agreed to help out Eliana, and the two worked together to craft a state-of-the-art flying mech that Eliana could operate. Once they finished up, before doing the final touches to stop it from overheating, Ayala headed to get some sleep. But in the meantime, Eliana made some additions. Finally, she revealed her intentions. She was not simply trying to soar the skies, but she wanted to take revenge and destroy the Air Armada. With her flying death machine, Eliana became a deadly scourge of the skies, with her one goal being to destroy the Air Armada, which honestly is pretty impressive considering her humble beginnings. And really, this is pretty much it for Eliana's story. She's sort of a villain or anti-hero depending on how you see it, and really the most important thing about her story is Julesvale and the introduction of the city, which is probably one of the most important cities in the Aether Universe. Lastly, and perhaps the most mysterious of them all, is Aether, the Glacier's Might. Aether is perhaps one of the most interesting characters in the Aether Universe, because, well, he doesn't actually live on Aether. Aether comes from a northern continent called the Ice Barrens. Oddly though, we actually don't fully know where the Ice Barrens are. We just know it's called the Northern Continent. And given the fact that Aether's people are called the Hyperboreans, which in the real world is a reference to a continent that is north of the real known world, you might think that it would be completely north and separated by ocean from the Aether. However, this isn't fully true. According to Hodon's bio, his mountains actually bordered the Ice Barrens, and given the look of the map, one might argue that the Ice Barrens are actually this area off to the northeast of Aether. And perhaps much like Europe and Asia in the real world, they're just considered different continents due to their geographical differences. Especially considering there's a very large mountain range separating the two. But really, we don't know. So hey, Dan, if you're watching this, let us know in the comments, where is the Ice Barrens? So although we don't know where the Ice Barrens really are, we do know a lot about it. Aether is one of the Hyperboreans, the people that survived the harsh conditions of the Ice Barrens. And specifically, he's a member of the elite battalion known as the Harbor Guard, which in history have defended the Hyperboreans from other elemental factions trying to invade the Ice Barrens. However, lately in the world of Aether, the contact with the Harbor Guard and the Hyperboreans has all but disappeared, and the people of Aether are simply left to believe that the Hyperboreans were maybe forced to retreat inland, as the Harbor Guard were maybe defeated by an elemental faction. The reality is Aether and the Harbor Guard actually left their posts at the coast to go further inland to find and battle a deadly threat known as the Black Ice. The Black Ice has been tormenting the Hyperboreans, and these creatures of ice and shadow descended upon their homes and began to slaughter the Hyperboreans. But sadly, the Harbor Guard was too late. Many Hyperboreans were already defeated, and many great warriors of the Harbor Guard also fell in battle. And Aether was one of the few warriors that survived the encounter with the Black Ice. And now alone, he wanders the northern reaches of the Ice Barrens, looking to hunt and destroy the source of the Black Ice. Meanwhile, the remaining Hyperboreans that survived the massacre scattered across the tundras looking for a new place to call home. And that is Daedalus's story. It's kind of confusing, a little bit random, but definitely intriguing. And that about covers it for our main 3 side stories. As you've seen, they're not completely connected to the main overarching story, but definitely have implications on the world building of Aether. And with that out of the way, I think we're now ready to jump into the story of Champions of Aether. And it's important to know that all of the events in Champions of Aether actually take place at the same time as the events of Rivals 1. So let's jump right into it. Our story brings us back to the bustling city of Julesvale, which recently has had a gold rush in the nearby mines. The caverns deep below Julesvale are filled with precious relics and valuable minerals, but this particular mining craze has been sparked by the recent discovery of a brand new ore called Obsidian. Obsidian has the miraculous properties of being able to rejuvenate and empower those who wield it, and as such the price has skyrocketed in the market. Foreigners from all across Aether have flocked to Julesvale, most of which looking for their chance to grab some Obsidian. And the most nefarious player in this race for the Obsidian is none other than Badger Co. The corporation has the largest stake in the mining game, and is doing its best to muscle out all the competition and capitalize off this new craze by any means necessary, including putting the safety of the people at risk. Badger Co. runs the city of Julesvale, and their monopoly is nearly unstoppable. But there is one hero who emerged with the goal of thwarting their evil. Her name is Fleet, the Archer of Justice. Fleet is the self-proclaimed protector of Julesvale, and in Robin Hood style, steals from the corrupt and gives to the exploited, and her current target is Badger Co. While looking for leads, she mistakenly encountered and identified Ayala as a member of Badger Co. But after interrogating Ayala, she realized that she no longer works at the company. Originally, Ayala was tasked to make an automated mining machine for Badger Co. But Badger Co. didn't care much for the safety measures that Ayala put in place, and after she protested about the potential hazards and dangers, she was fired. And after hearing the story, Fleet realized that they both have the same goal, to take down Badger Co. So reluctantly, Ayala decides to help out Fleet. Ayala has Fleet go into the mines below and retrieve some of her stolen blueprints to see what Badger Co. is plotting. And when Fleet recovers the plans, to Ayala's disappointment, her fears have come true. Badger Co. is creating the Mega Digger, a ginormous automated mining machine capable of undermining the entire city of Julesvale. And Foreman Kohler plans to run a test run of the drill deeper in the caverns. So Ayala asks Fleet to put a stop to the test run, where the entire city of Julesvale could collapse. So Fleet rushes to the scene, fighting through Badger Co. lackeys and no good bandits along the way, eventually stumbling upon Foreman Kohler himself. The foreman of course has no plans to stop their excavation, and while he can't bury the truth, he certainly can bury bodies, and threatens to take out Fleet if she won't back down. But Fleet's not deterred, and with her trusty bow, empowered by wind gems that give her elemental might, she swiftly defeats the foreman and puts the drill out of commission. And for the time being, both Ayala and Fleet have successfully thwarted or at least put a dent in Badger Co.'s plans. But of course, the company won't disappear overnight, and they have a lot of work to do to loosen their grip over Julesvale. And in the meantime, Fleet begins to wander the streets of the city, when she's approached by the local generous philanthropist, Randall. Wait, that sounds familiar. Randall was known for having a massive hoard of Obsidian. However, he also liked to give it away to people in need, and was a hero within the community. Although, Randall tells Fleet that recently he sensed a darkness growing in Julesvale, and is in dire need of Fleet's aid. He tells Fleet that he had enlisted 3 foreigners who came to town in order to help him stop the looming darkness, but all 3 of them had betrayed him. All 3 of them went into the depths of the caverns below and stole ancient relics of Julesvale for their own greed. Randall believes that the 3 might actually be working in cahoots with Badger Co., and tasks Fleet to find the thieves and put a stop to their antics, as well as take back the relics. The first of these thieves was the pirate Slade. Slade came to Julesvale from far away, coming from an island chain in the ocean south of Aether, called the Polkai Islands. The people of these volcanic islands live in these small communities, living off the land and harvesting the waves. However, the islands are also known for having a plethora of pirates, and some of these pirate sightings have even been seen as far up north as Merchantport. And Slade happens to be one such pirate, having come all the way up to Aether. However, he reassures the people of Aether that he comes with a good cause. He told one local reporter about the legend of the 3 Tiers, divine visitors that came to the Polkai Islands and shaped their culture for generations. However, recently, one of the 3 spirits, simply called Joy, stopped appearing and threw off the balance of the region. In order to save the Polkai Islands, Slade is now on the hunt to find and bring back joy to his home. And despite this good-natured story, some still believe that Slade is just a pirate looking for more treasures. And in fact, that was sort of the case. Slade approached Randall as he had heard about his stash of obsidian, and Randall agreed to make an offer for some of the obsidian. If Slade went down to the depths of the mines and retrieved a relic known as the Drop of Nourishment from an oasis deep in the caves, then Randall was willing to give as much obsidian as Slade needed. He began his journey to the underground oasis, a beautiful water-filled portion of the caverns. And after doing some investigating and defeating some shadowy obsessed miners, he actually managed to find the Drop of Nourishment. With the relic in hand, he returned back to the surface. He mentions that his goal was only to find obsidian to lure Orcane back to the Polkai Islands. Wait a second, Orcane? Alright, this line, as well as a few other lines later in the story, have major implications on the Aether Universe. But warning, we are sort of stepping into speculation territory, so although it's not completely confirmed, it's definitely heavily implied. So, based on this line, it seems that Orcane also originates from the Polkai Islands, which makes a lot of sense since we know Orcane doesn't originate from Merchant Port, but rather arrived one day. But the most interesting thing here is that it implies that Slade is trying to lure Orcane back to the Polkai Islands because Orcane is the spirit of joy, one of the gods of the Polkai Island. So is Orcane actually a water deity? It would explain why he's more creature-like than person-like, and also why his abilities are so OP. I mean, he can literally teleport to any body of water. And do I have to point out the giant Orcane statue in Merchant Port? Now, there could be another reason for this giant statue. Maybe it's not Orcane, but the similarity is right there. And although it's not confirmed, it definitely seems like Slade just said that Orcane is in fact a god. Slade is amazed by the amount of riches in the Julesvale mines, and instead of giving up the Drop of Nourishment to Randall, he decides to look for obsidian himself deeper in the mines. The next foreigner who betrayed Randall was the ex-wall-runner Hamir. Hamir comes from a small settlement hidden somewhere deep in the Archive Mountains called the Crystal Oasis. Little is truly known about those who settled at the Crystal Oasis, but what is known is that the founders were exiled from the Aetherian forest when the Rothwall was formed, and it's the descendants of these founders, such as Hamir, who live at the Crystal Oasis. But at some point, Hamir decided to leave the Crystal Oasis to join the Wall Runners to the north, where he found the love of his life, his partner, Madoc. Now, we don't know the full details, but when the rock wall was breached by the Black Roots, the same eldritch monster that Crag went in search of, while trying to maintain the wall from the roots, Madoc was killed in the line of duty. Hamir was devastated, and after his partner passed away, he left the Wall Runners to go into exile, an extremely rare occurrence as Wall Runners typically devoted their entire life to the wall. And after wandering in shame, Hamir came to Julesvale looking for a new direction in life. But to his surprise, he would only be met with a grim reminder of his past. He saw the familiar face of Olympia. Olympia was the Amethyst Fist, the champion of the Crystal Oasis and a martial arts legend. Whatever Hamir's reason was for joining the Wall Runners, Olympia only saw it as abandoning their homeland. And although she didn't know about Madoc's passing, she held a strong grudge against Hamir. As for why Olympia was in Julesvale, a while back, Olympia began to find disturbances in the crystals of her homeland. There were impurities in the gems from a sickness deep beneath the earth. So underground, she followed the source all the way to Julesvale, and she began conducting research to find and destroy the root of the evil. The encounter between Hamir and Olympia led to a lot of commotion, when suddenly it brought the attention of Randall. And while Olympia stormed off, Randall comforted Hamir temporarily. He offered Hamir an opportunity for a new direction in life, tasking him to find the mythical Shield of Courage, a relic deep in the caverns below. And well, Hamir decided, why not, and headed down to the mines. And after encountering some mysterious, shadowy Badger Co lackeys, he actually managed to find the legendary relic. With the Shield of Courage, Hamir felt like his unbreakable self again. Full of confidence, he returned to the surface to speak to Randall. And to his surprise, Randall told Hamir of another relic much like the Shield of Courage, called the Breath of Life. And Randall believed that that relic could be used to resurrect his lover. However, Randall had heard that the nefarious Olympia had stolen that relic deep in the lava tubes below, and Randall tells Hamir to take out Olympia by any means necessary. And with some cloudy judgment and the Shield of Courage, Hamir actually agrees to find Olympia and confront her. Meanwhile, we have our third quote-unquote thief that betrayed Randall, being Artemis. Artemis is a Fire Mora captain, a squadron of elite soldiers who work directly under Prince Zetterburn on the field of battle. And after the Rite of Fire was mysteriously stolen and Prince Zetterburn was sent to retrieve it, the new Emperor Loxodon sent out Artemis to find and retrieve a new powerful relic to legitimize his right to the throne. On her mission, she headed to Julesvale, which had a reputation for powerful relics. And it was here that she encountered Randall, and when she explained her goals to the old man, he told her of the legendary Ember of Destruction. It was a relic hidden in the dangerous lava tubes below the Jules Vale mines. Artemis was up for the challenge and headed out for the relic. And much like the other thieves, after a quick encounter with the villainous Badger Co., she found the legendary relic. She could feel the power of it immediately, and knew it would do quite well for her mission, even wondering if she could use it herself to take the throne. And in order to test its full potential and perhaps feed her own ambitions, she headed to the oasis in the mines to test the limits of her relic. And back in the present, Randall explained his side of the story in a maybe less truthful version. So Fleet agreed to go back into the mines, find the thieves, and steal back the relics for Randall. Meanwhile, Hymir finds Olympia injured in the lava tubes, and seeing her defenseless, has a change of mind about hurting Olympia. Instead, Hymir helps up Olympia, and it's explained that she of course doesn't have the Breath of Life, but rather Randall made that up so Hymir would take out Olympia before she found anything incriminating about Randall, as she's been very suspicious about his activity and the source of the darkness. When suddenly, Fleet appears on the scene, battles Hymir really quickly, doesn't really win, but does steal the Shield of Courage right from Hymir's grasp. And for the sake of not making this video too repetitive, pretty much the same exact thing happens to both Artemis and Slade. They also encounter Olympia while she's doing research in the mines, and just like Hymir, Fleet came out of nowhere and stole the relics. Also, Olympia and Slade found out that Amathor is actually real and alive, which is pretty cool. Anyways, Fleet is successful and brings back the 3 relics to Randall, who then tells Fleet of an ancient ritual he wants to perform in the catacombs below Jules Vale. Although it's extremely suspicious, she agrees to help protect him on the way to the altar, as there's tons of monsters in the crypt. Eventually the pair reach the ritual site, with a large sealed door. Now, Fleet is of course very concerned about this so-called ritual, as this is a very suspicious setting, and of course Randall reveals the truth, transforming into his true form, the Necromancer. Randall and his fellow champions had sealed the darkness of the abyss below Jules Vale thousands of years ago, and thanks to the Breath of Life, Randall had endured the years, and seen the peace they fought for break down due to the greed of the people. In order to make lasting peace in Aether, Randall plans to reopen the seal using the 4 shards, and harnessing the power of the darkness, he alone can make the perfect world lacking greed. Fleet realizes that this guy is absolutely nuts, and runs back to the surface before being taken out. However, Randall's plan is in full swing. All of those who were hoarding obsidian have gone under dark transformations and are now under the influence of the darkness. So the city quickly became overran with obsidian-possessed soldiers of the Necromancer. So those who weren't under control ran to seek shelter in the mines below. And it's here that the 4 protagonists meet up again at the refugee camp. And despite Fleet making a complete mess of everything, after she explained her side of the story, they agreed to work together to stop Randall. And after her extensive research, Olympia explains that the reason the darkness has been seeping out, and this emergence of this new ore, obsidian, is because each of the champions held on to the power of the shards. Their greed led to their downfall, and if each shard had been left in the seal, then the abyss could have never leaked out, and they would have been locked in there for eternity. And while Olympia protects the civilians in the mines, the 4 protagonists head back to face Randall and put a stop to this scheme once and for all. However, when they arrive, they find that Randall has yet to open the abyss. He can't bring himself to part ways with the Breath of Life, the source behind his very existence. When suddenly, the shadows from beyond the door grasp the Breath of Life from Randall's hands and burst open the doors. And the horrors from the abyss formed into a monster known as Avarum, the Sin of Greed. It's revealed that Randall's plans were actually the plans of the darkness beyond the seal, as they had slowly corrupted his mind over the years. Avarum explains that the abyss creatures are the rightful inhabitants of Aether, and have been plotting their escape for thousands of years. He mentions another abyss monster, Envis, from the Godai Delta, which brings up another theory/speculation part about the source of the abyss. There's heavy implication that Avarum is the abyss representation of the sin of greed, and Envis, the culprit behind the events of Rivals 1, who takes the form of other people, was the embodiment of envy. This of course implies that there are 7 abyss monsters that represent the 7 deadly sins of the world, each of which are sealed away underneath the earth in different parts of Aether. And Avarum is finally free, and is surprised to see that the new champions fight alone without the help of the Titans. Despite the odds being severely stacked against them, the 4 elemental heroes fought back against Avarum, in one of the coolest final boss fights ever. I mean, I absolutely love the song, it's so good. Anyways, the heroes are actually able to fend off Avarum, as he had wasted too much of his essence making obsidian for Randall's plot, and wasn't at his full power. And quickly, before he could recover, the 4 heroes grabbed the shards and sealed away Avarum once again. And this time, they agreed they had to leave the power of the shards behind despite their temptation, and headed back to the surface to celebrate. And with the abyss sealed back again, the obsidian lost its power and Jules Vale went back to normal. And the 4 heroes all split up on their own journeys. Now for the post-credit scenes. Artemis returns to the Fire Capital to give a report about the encounter with Avarum. But Emperor Loxodon informed Artemis of a new, more pressing mission. Prince Zetterburn had turned traitorous and fled to the Godai Delta. He tasked Artemis to take out and execute his treasonous life. And despite being doubtful of Loxodon's claims, she heads out to the Godai Delta. As for Slade, he begins sailing towards Merchant Port, and realizes that Orkin had been hoarding obsidian not because he wanted it, but to protect the people of Merchant Port from the Abyss's influence. And on his journey to Merchant Port, he begins to smell smoke in the distance, implying that he's arriving to Merchant Port right after Zetterburn had burned it down. Hamir and Olympia mend their burnt bridges, and agree to work together in their hunt towards the other wellsprings of darkness across Aether. They know Avram's only the first of many, so they head towards the center of Aether to find and help Crag, who they believe is also on the same mission. And lastly, Fleet and Iola agree to keep working as partners to try and stop Badgerco's evil plans. And Fleet mentions that after she stops Badgerco, she plans to find more rivals to fight, basically meaning she's in Rivals 2. Also, Eliana appears in the background, no dialogue or really any importance, but a cool cameo. And that is pretty much the story mode for Dungeons of Aether. I think it's a really good story mode, has a lot of foreshadowing and world building, and sets up future Aether Studio titles. But anyways, there is still a little bit of lore left. This will be the final chapter, but I'm going to be breaking down the Tales of Aether comic, which follows one of my favorite characters, Clarin, the Flame Salvation. First off, I highly recommend that if you are interested in Aether lore, to purchase the comics yourself, read through them, and support Aether Studios, so hopefully they can make more stuff like this in the future. Because this will be mostly a story or plot summary, and skip some of these smaller character development stuff. Anyways, Tales of Aether, Future Imperfect, takes place at some point in the dystopian future version of Aether, where the Champions of Aether never escape the abyss below. In this timeline, Emperor Loxodon takes control of the Firelands and expands his empire across Aether, destroying the Air Armada and all that threatened his reign. And in fact, using advanced technologies, he managed to create a robotic body to extend his mortal life, earning him the title of the Eternal Emperor. However, because Loxodon lost the Rite of Fire years ago, the people of the Fireland's connection to the flame had slowly disappeared, and even Loxodon could only simulate firepower through technology such as plasma weapons. Despite their elemental connection being severed, Loxodon expanded the Flame Imperium across Aether, and thousands were displaced from their homes and forced into refugee camps and reservations on the outskirts of the Empire. And specifically, our story follows one such reservation and one child named Clarin. Clarin and her mother Clarissa are descendants of Clayn, the former leader of the Smoke Clan, and also Forsburn, the exiled prince and rightful heir to the throne. And perhaps because of Clarin's connection to Forsburn, she had been blessed by the Divine and was born with the power to still have a connection to the flame. However, to not arouse suspicion, she was forced to hide her powers in the camp, and despite the poor living conditions, they had to lay low. One night, Clarin would get a vision of her ancestors, Forsburn and Clayn, speaking to her. She receives a cryptic message from the two, telling her to find her mask. She awakes in the middle of the night and looks to find her mother, who's panicked outside of the tent, when suddenly explosives go off around them. Although Clarin, her father Doren, and her two siblings Issa and Ren all managed to survive the destruction, sadly, Clarissa was crushed by the rubble and didn't make it out alive. No one knew the true story behind the explosion at the Ashenville Reservation, but some heard rumors of regular purges occurring in other reservations, all orchestrated by Loxodon to keep the population in check. Devastated and full of hatred, Clarin decided to make it her life goal to rise the ranks of the Flame Imperium and kill Loxodon herself. And years later, after Clarin grew up, she decided to apply to the Flame Imperium military. At the nearby recruitment center, she met up with 3 other skilled applicants, Goss, Royce, and Burnett. And in order to join the military, the 4 of them had to pass this sort of My Hero Academia type challenge. So the 4 of them worked together to beat this obstacle course and impress the administrators, landing them all positions on the same ranger unit together. So for a few years they worked together as a ranger unit, conducting missions across Aether in the name of the Flame Imperium, such as a raid on the Water Trade Company. And it was clear that the 4 of them were an incredible team and had many successful missions, even garnering the attention of the Fire Capital Royal Guards, who were possibly looking for new recruits. And although Clarin wanted to join the Royal Guards to get closer to and eventually kill Loxodon, it would mean abandoning her squad mates. After agreeing to say no to any offers with her team, that night she would get another vision from Clayn, who is worried that Clarin is straying from her path to kill Loxodon. She warns Clarin to not get too attached to her new life as a soldier, and if needed, she must sacrifice her new life for the greater good. The next day, their squad was tasked with a new mission to apprehend a high-priority target, a terrorist known as Malo. Malo was notorious for attacking and blowing up remote Imperial outposts and causing chaos with his large arsenal of explosives, even being known to attack reservations like the one that Clarin had grown up in. They located Malo in the western wastelands, in the wreckage of an old Air Armada airship, and suspecting an ambush, Malo set off a flashbang and proceeded to unleash a chaotic frenzy of explosives. Chaos ensued, and Malo actually was destroying them pretty hard, 1 versus 4, until suddenly, Claren decides to use a little bit of her fire to light one of the explosives still in Malo's hand. Malo then proceeds to get jumped by the other squad members who didn't even realize what Claren had done, while Malo is blown away to have witnessed somebody who still has the connection to the flame. Claren attempts to interrogate Malo, wanting to know if he was the one responsible for his mother's death. However, Malo is still in shock and passes out, giving no closure to Claren's grief or anger. And more determined than ever to get revenge on Loxodon, she decides to take the opportunity to accept a Royal Guard's offer to become a Royal Guard herself, despite her promise to her squad mates. Sometime later, the day of the Royal Guard ceremony had come, where she would be given her plasma saber in front of Emperor Loxodon, and she planned to use that opportunity to cut him down where he stood. So, in front of the large crowd of Flame Imperium citizens and the Emperor himself, she revealed her true nature, swearing to kill Loxodon here and now. Amused, Loxodon called off his security drones, and decided to face her one-on-one, to set an example for all of those who defy his rule. And despite her confidence, she got absolutely destroyed. Loxodon did not hold back, and even brought up this fire axe which looks super badass, and then eventually grabbed Claren and slammed her to the ground, destroying her tech and leaving her completely defenseless. Despite making it her life goal to kill Loxodon, she got completely bodied in front of everyone, and was quickly captured and sentenced to be executed. Claren began to break down in prison, being both physically and mentally defeated, when she was approached by a mysterious figure. The cloaked individual revealed herself to be the master engineer known as Ayala. Much like Loxodon, she had survived due to her mostly non-organic body that she designed for herself and Loxodon, as the Eternal Emperor needed eternal maintenance. Ayala feels immensely guilty for helping create the dystopian world they live in now, and sympathizes with Claren's cause. She reveals that Loxodon had her build a time machine, so they could eventually go back in time and bring the Rite of Fire back to the future, to empower the Empire once again and take control of all of Aether. Claren doesn't really believe the story of time travel really existing, but Ayala convinces her that it's possible to go back in time and take out Loxodon before he became invincible, and without any other options, she agrees to the insane plan. The two escape the prison and are chased down by Loxodon's guards. Ayala warns Claren that once she's sent into the past, she can't come back to the future, and with the guards on their tail, Claren makes the hasty decision to agree to go to the past and leave behind her friends and family. And to her shock, it was actually successful. Claren made it back to the past, and instead of foolishly deciding to face Loxodon one-on-one again, she makes it her goal to find and rescue the Champions of Aether. And that's basically the plot summary of Tales of Aether. It really sets up for the Rivals 2 story mode, where I'm sure Claren will eventually come in contact with the Champions of Aether and probably end up saving them from the Abyss, since obviously in their timeline, they never escape the Abyss. And that about covers it for everything we know currently in the Aether Universe. We've covered all of the main games in the story, besides maybe Lovers of Aether, and we've pretty much covered every major character. Although, I feel like we're missing someone. Someone really important. Guadua! The biggest, baddest panda to ever be seen in Aether. I mean, it's kind of hard to say if Guadua is actually canon or not, since she's not technically part of the actual base game, but she is playable in Creatures of Aether, which is canon, although she has like no lore in it, so really, we don't really know where she's from. Now, my fan theory is that she's from the same place as this character named Minto, who apparently comes from a distant land, but yeah, we don't really know. Oh, also Palm exists in the future, and she's like a pop star in Neo Julesvale. Yeah. So, we have officially completed the Rivals of Aether lore breakdown. There's a lot to unpack here, and still many unanswered questions. If you have any questions or theories, let me know in the comments below. Things you like about the story, things you don't like, that's cool too. And before I end the video, if you're interested, I linked 2 different lore-related Discords in the description below, so if you want to join in and talk about Rivals of Aether lore, then you can go feel free to join those. Definitely not the video you guys expected from me. Regular videos coming soon, and thanks for watching.